Hello, this is Michael Hexter, and welcome to Politics 2100 here on YouTube. So this episode is based on I guess you could say it was an insight that I had earlier today in response to a tweet, and I wrote a response in the form of a tweet to that. And I realized that concept seemed to have some applicability beyond simply this particular situation. So anyway, I'm titling this episode "Biden and corporate Dem leaders, act as butlers for the GOP and the donor class." So this metaphor of a butler, and I've been working on Politics 2100 and trying to characterize what are the dynamics of U.S. politics. Why is the politics of the U.S. so radically tilted to the right, and the Overton window is far, far to the right? And for some people, this is not mysterious if you think about all the corporate donations and all the money that flows into the coffers, or the campaign coffers of politicians, and how they are most politicians, and how they are biased and influenced by these donations, and also scared by the prospect of donations to their opponents in the same amounts. So, but anyway, even that I think doesn't quite characterize what the qualities are of these two parties. And in this case, I'm talking about the Democratic Party leadership. And I think the metaphor of a butler is good, or is applicable for, let's say, Democratic leadership since Bill Clinton. In other words, Bill Clinton and thereafter have acted in a way as butlers to the GOP and the donor class. So, and sometimes people call this neoliberalism, but neoliberalism takes different forms in the different parties in the United States. And so I'm trying to create a way to characterize our politics so people can recognize what's going on, can oppose the bad things about our politics, and create a new, more effective politics that addresses our collective and needs, also obviously personal needs, but our needs together as a nation and as a species. So anyway, this idea of a butler is, I've thought about it some more over the course of today, and I realized that it really hits the nail on the head in terms of how, now first taking the context that we're currently in with the debt ceiling struggle, that the Democratic leaders, the corporate leadership of the Democratic Party, is always solicitous toward, or almost always way more solicitous toward the GOP than vice versa. In fact, it's almost 100% one way, that there's a solicitousness, there's a sedulousness, fancy word, meaning sort of fawning attention to the GOP, even as the GOP is described by these leaders as being, MAGA and bad and ruthless. They don't use the word ruthless, but they are ruthless, and but not playing by the rules of the game. So this is where the focus on norms, I think, is well characterized by this butler distinction, that they are a class of butlers. Okay, now the butlers are a high-ranking servant, okay, within a rich household, or where you have many servants, okay, and the butler is the the chief servant among those servants. And butlers are often very, in fact, butlers are taught, and there are actually schools for butlers even now in England, mostly, where they are taught to be the best possible servants to rich people who can afford to pay them. And I imagine nowadays a good butler earns six figures or something like that, but works long hours and is entirely consumed with their work, and also probably has to take endless, though maybe within limits. Maybe some butlers are able to free themselves from an abusive relationship with their rich, employers. Nevertheless, butlers are sometimes portrayed as being those who civilize and educate their employers. So, in other words, that the butler is sometimes is better schooled in manners and in matters of protocol, such as they exist among private for private individuals. So, but in any case, they are brought in, especially those that are trained, are brought in to create this kind of order in a household where the owner of the house and the employer is maybe unschooled in some of these things. In other words, this is often a capitalist of some kind that has a sociopathic edge, in part because of their business and so forth and so on, that in our economy rewards a sociopathic approach to business relationships, to in a sense trying to get the better of both your competitors and also your employees. And so this butler is there to try to, quote unquote, not necessarily consciously, but the idea is that in the way they are supposed to civilize the host, or not the host, the employer. And at least this is, I'm not all butlers are in this role, but anyway, the Democratic Party at least seems to, or the leadership of the Democratic Party seems to have emerged into politics in a way as the second fiddle and as the monitor and I would say, also the servant of the Republican, or at least the ideas of the Republican Party. So this fits under neoliberalism, and one could say, well, this is about what neoliberalism is about, but I'm characterizing pretty well this attitude, so that expresses itself now in this debt ceiling exchange, where Joe Biden is taking a one-down position in relationship to the GOP in a way that is deleterious to his own interests, but he is so scrupulously following the rules set by someone else, and he's trying to maintain comity and order and so forth and so on between the two parties, more than he's trying to actually govern and to use his authority to keep the U.S. economy afloat, but also there probably won't be a default, but that the deal that will come out of this sedulousness by Biden, this fawning of Biden over the GOP, the MAGA Republicans that he supposedly inveighs against in other contexts, that this will lead to American spending and the social programs like SNAP and others will become more restrictive, and there'll be clawback of funds from COVID relief and so forth and so on, even though they probably will be needed at some point, especially when when we feel the impacts of the COVID emergency lapsing, so forth and so on. So anyway, there are a whole host of bad outcomes from that can come from Joe Biden not performing his duty in terms of the 14th Amendment, but instead running after Republicans and treating Republicans as more of an authority than he in this matter. So, in a way, performing the role of a butler, now not the sort of imperious butler that I just described, or this sort of rulemaking butler that is the authority on protocol that the relatively clueless but rich employer turns to for advice on entertaining or etiquette or whatever it is, but instead is the butler that is afraid for his position and is attempting to conform to the demands of the owner, whatever, however wild they are, and is not standing by his sort of supposed professional goals. Though one of the professional goals of a butler is to serve, so to be on a one down position. So that one down position is something that Joe Biden seems to accept fairly easily, especially in some of these matters. So we can infer, though, that part of this is a submission to the donor class itself. So the GOP or comity with the GOP is something that the donor class wants. The donor class is using, so this, as I've talked about in earlier episodes of Politics 2100, the good cop, bad cop routine is a good characterization of how the Democrats and the Democratic leadership and the Republican leadership work together to serve the donor class. And so the good cops can't tell the bad cops, can't lay down the law to the bad cops. They are working together to really vis-a-vis the American people, to create the illusion that one is good and one is bad, but literally they have the same plan. In this case, the plan is austerity. The plan is cutting the functions of government in society to enable the donor class to extract as much profit from society, to keep workers as insecure as possible, so that they throw themselves at any employment opportunities or commercial opportunities that are thrown at them by corporations and so forth and so on, that people are in a permanent state of insecurity that makes them certainly better, quote unquote, better or more subservient workers at lower pay than they might otherwise demand, and also to be hunting for solutions from the private sector for needs, that physical, whatever life needs, existential needs that they might have, rather than asking government. So undermining government all the time for people to orient themselves toward the private sector. So this good cop, bad cop routine keeps people in the illusion that, well, one party is going to be better than the other for them, but then, oops, they don't. So, but anyway, it appears politically, though, that the Democratic Party is always conceding, or almost always conceding, to the Republicans the power in the power relationship between them, or in the let's say the performative power relationship they have in the good cop, bad cop routine, is concede, say, oh shucks, I'm sorry, the bad cop won, or oops, they had a point, what can I say? So anyway, this is being the servant of, or the butler for the ruling class, the donor class, the capitalist class, or the big capitalist class, and corporate class. And so you could say, well, I mean, Joe Biden can, console himself to some degree, saying, well, I'm taking this political damage, and he is damaging himself politically, but I'm doing it for the donors. I'm supposed to do this. I'm supposed to take one for the big team, the big behind the scenes team, and I look like a fool. Now I'm inferring that he has this attitude. I don't know how he thinks about what he's doing. It certainly from the outside looks like his popularity is in the toilet. He relatively speaking, and he certainly, as someone who's trying to run for office again, for reelection, and anyway, so he looks weak and so forth and so on. He looks like the servant of other people rather than the commander in chief, the authority, so forth and so on. And he's accepting that role. So another element to this Butler metaphor is, as applied to the Democratic Party and their leadership, is that they are very, very concerned about norms and about appearances. And again, this is something that butlers are brought into rich families to create the illusion or the reality or whatever it is, somewhere in between of them, this family being upper class and having things together and in order and so forth and so on. And so this person is there to organize the family, the household, so the things look upper class, look distinguished, look all the things that the rich person would aspire to. And anyway, so but this and a lot of that has to do with norms, with understanding rules and norms and so forth and so on, and performing those in one's duties as a butler or as the head of household for a series of servants that are the boss of the under servants, if the household is big enough to have more than one servant. So anyway, and this is something, and butlers being very servants overall, or certainly, household servants or professional servants of various kinds are often people who have very who are very they're not people who think of themselves as members of the working class. They think of themselves as something better. They think they grasp onto norms and the norms of the upper class, and the norms they're supposed to help the upper class achieve through their labor, through their advice. They're the butler. Those norms are what keeps them sort of warm at night. In other words, literally, it's their sense of being better than, is having even better than their employers. In other words, literally, they can look down on their employers if they feel that. So if they feel like they live more in a more polished and upper class seeming way, or understanding the right norms and being able to conform to them and to tolerate their unruly employers with their application of norms and their maintenance of norms and so forth and so on. And people are employed literally, quote unquote governesses and things like that are also forms of servants or au pairs as they're called now. Though au pair is a little more, more of a babysitter rather than someone who's supposed to teach, give private, but tutors, you could say, a combination of a au pair and a tutor. Anyway, so but people are supposed to bring the young employee, the children of the employer, on a certain path and so forth and so on. So anyway, so they're there to uphold and to transmit norms and so forth and so on. So this is a very close description, very closely fitting description of how the Democratic Party has acted in the last few decades. In other words, as the party that has grasped onto norms as being a way to, and the far right Republican Party has thrown out norms, and so the Democratic Party has marketed itself as being the party of like butlers, like a butler, or a class of butlers, that they are the upholder of norms, okay, and that they are the people, therefore they should be admired and they should be voted for, so forth and so on, and they should be looking down on their unruly, willful employers, okay? And meanwhile, those employers have been scheming and so forth and so on to just basically take power from, so this obsession with norms has led the Democratic Party to, not use power when they have power, to not grasp onto opportunities to gain power via fighting for, for instance, Al Gore fighting in 2000 to get all the votes counted in Florida, so forth and so on. So there's this whole let's say, you could say, self-styled tragic figure in a way, being a tragic figure in your own mind, and therefore a noble person, of saying, well, I am upholding norms, even though these awful savages or whatever, they don't use that word, but these unruly brats of the Republican Party are tearing them up, and weren't we good? Weren't we wonderful for upholding norms? Well, you weren't if they took over the republic and you don't have a republic anymore. You don't have a democracy anymore. So anyway, I think we'll leave this here. I think this is you can take this metaphor and run with it yourself and see whether it helps you understand how the Democrats, in a deep way, the Democratic leadership that grew up in the 90s, in the 2000s, in the 80s and 90s, and essentially those people who are now 60, 70, 80 years old, how they act as political actors, and we're hopeful that I'm hopeful by pointing this out that younger generations or other people who are not in this group will, criticize and drive them out of power if they can, or change their ways. So if Joe Biden is listening, that he should stop being a butler and start being the president and using power for, as he was elected to do. So obviously within the law, but pushing toward justice, pushing toward using the tool of government in a positive way to, as I've said in a recent video, it's not my invention, but to balance the economy that becomes by itself unbalanced. It's not a self-equilibrating economy. It requires balancing by the government. Anyway, so if you found anything in this video interesting or worthwhile, please like the video. Please share your thoughts in the comments below. Maybe we can start a discussion there. And please subscribe to Politics 2100 for notice of more of these videos. Thanks.